"Old man, move away from the line. Now." The recruit barked the order so loudly that even the dockworkers froze, but the gray-haired stranger didn't budge an inch. He just kept staring at the warship as if he had every right to be there. "I said identify yourself," the recruit snapped, grabbing his arm. Yet the old man only breathed out, "Careful, son, you don't know who you're touching." His sleeve slid back in the struggle, revealing a faded frogman tattoo so old, so crude, that the watching sailors felt their stomachs drop, because no civilian should have had that mark. Before we dive in, tell us in the comments, where in the world are you watching from? The dock should have been quiet at that hour, but tension rippled through the air the moment the recruits spotted the old man stepping past the red-line markers. They moved fast, too fast, boots thudding against metal grates as if they were responding to an active threat rather than a gray-haired stranger who didn't even bother to pick up his pace. He just kept walking with his hands clasped behind his back, eyes fixed on the ship moored at the end of the pier, like he'd seen it 1,000 times before and was simply returning to something that once belonged to him. One of the recruits barked a warning. The old man didn't flinch. Another told him he was trespassing. He only tilted his head, studying the hull with a faint, unreadable expression. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, almost gentle. "I'm here for someone." That answer annoyed them more than defiance would have. It felt dismissive, like he wasn't taking them seriously, like he didn't see them as a threat at all. So they formed a semicircle, tightening the distance, deciding to detain him just to assert control. A couple of sailors paused mid-task, watching the scene unfold with growing unease, sensing something the recruits couldn't yet see. One of the recruits stepped closer, shoulders squared, jaw tight, trying to sound authoritative even though his voice wavered just a little. He demanded the old man's name, his purpose, his clearance. But all he got in return was that same calm, steady reply, "I'm expected." No elaboration, no urgency, just those two words, simple, frustrating, and delivered with a confidence that didn't match the situation at all. To the recruits, it felt like evasiveness. Or worse, confusion. They exchanged looks, silently deciding this guy was either stubborn or slipping mentally, and either way, they weren't about to let him wander around the dock unchecked. Not while they were being evaluated, not while every officer on base kept saying, "Your discipline reflects on your team." So one stepped forward, grabbed the man's arm, and reached for the cuffs. The old man winced, not dramatically, just enough to make everyone watching feel it. He didn't pull away. He didn't argue. He simply let it happen, which somehow made the scene more uncomfortable than if he'd resisted. As the sleeve of his jacket slid back, a faded black and blue tattoo peeked out. Sharp lines, old symbols, something any experienced sailor would have recognized instantly. But the recruits didn't even glance at it. They were too focused on proving they could control the situation. By now, a small crowd of sailors and dockhands had gathered, whispering under their breath. "Why treat an old guy like that?" someone muttered. A bosun shook his head, already sensing that whatever this was, the recruits were about to regret it. Still, the trainees doubled down, tightening their grip, trying to look decisive. Maybe it was pride, maybe fear of looking weak, maybe just inexperience. But the old man finally turned his head, looking directly at the one holding him. His voice barely rose above a whisper, yet it felt like it cut through the whole dock. "Son, be sure you know who you're laying hands on." The recruit tightened the restraint, and that tiny shift was enough to drag the old man's sleeve all the way up his forearm. What had been just a hint of ink suddenly came into full view. Dark, rough, carved into skin that had known decades of sun and salt. Not a modern seal trident. Not a clean, sharp navy insignia. This was older, raw, almost primitive. A hand-inked frogman emblem from a different era entirely. The kind of mark that wasn't given. It was earned in blood, grit, and missions that were classified long before half the people on that dock were even born. A chief petty officer walking by caught sight of it and froze mid-step. His mouth actually fell open for a second before he snapped it shut again. He blinked hard, as if making sure his eyes weren't playing tricks on him. That symbol, old-school UDT, the ancestor of the modern SEALs, was something you only saw in history books on memorial walls. Almost no one still breathing had it etched into their arm. And definitely not someone quietly getting cuffed on a pier like a confused trespasser. The chief stepped forward fast, almost stumbling in his rush. "Hold on. Hey, let him go." His voice cracked, something he couldn't hide. But the recruits didn't even turn fully toward him. They just snapped back. "Sir, we have it under control." That made the chief go pale. These kids didn't understand. They had no idea what they were touching, what history they were manhandling. He didn't bother arguing again. He could see their training mode tunnel vision. So he went straight for his radio, hands shaking just enough to betray the seriousness of what he'd recognized. He pressed the transmit button, leaning slightly away from the crowd, but his voice trembled through every syllable. "This is Chief Rourke on Dock 3. You need to notify the Admiral, now." He didn't wait for questions. He didn't explain. Because if he was right, if that tattoo was real, then every second suddenly mattered. And whatever story this old man carried with him was about to crash through the chain of command like a storm. On the command floor, the room was its usual controlled chaos, screens flashing, officers moving with practiced urgency. But everything stopped the moment a junior signals officer called out, "Sir, priority alert from Dock 3. Incoming ID match request. Possible name, Daniel Hartman." The Admiral looked up sharply. "Repeat that." "Daniel Hartman, sir." For a heartbeat, the Admiral didn't breathe. The name hit him like a physical blow. He stepped away from the cluster of officers, typed the name into a secure terminal, and waited as the classified archive decrypted layer by layer. Then the file appeared, most of it redacted in thick black bars, but what was visible made his blood run cold. UDT Unit, Pioneer Diver Vietnam Era, Deep Recon and Covert Rescue Ops Commendations, Award Withheld Status, Presumed Deceased, Classified. The Admiral leaned closer as another hidden attachment unlocked. A blurred black-and-white photograph of a young operator with the same unmistakable frogman emblem on his forearm. The same one the recruits had ignored. "It can't be," he whispered, almost afraid to believe it. But if there was even a chance. He spun toward his officers, voice cracking with an urgency none of them had ever heard from him. "Initiate full stand-down on Dock 3. I want access cleared immediately. Send a Marine honor team to the pier. Now." Head snapped up. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't even close. Mobilization at this level was reserved for heads of state, or ghosts from the Navy's deepest legend vault. "Prepare transport." The Admiral barked as he grabbed his cover. "I'm going down there myself." A stunned silence followed him to the elevator before the entire command center erupted into motion. Officers ran. Calls flew across channels. Protocol bent around a single name that wasn't supposed to exist anymore. And the Admiral, heart pounding, rode toward the dock knowing that whatever waited for him there was going to change everything. The recruits had just begun steering the old man toward the security hut, their grips firm, their jaws set, determined to finish what they'd started. But before they could take 5 steps, the low rumble of engines rolled across the dock. One vehicle, then another, then a third, all black, all official, all moving with the kind of purpose that made everyone in the area stop what they were doing. A Marine honor detachment stepped out first, full dress blues, gloves immaculate, posture carved from stone. Conversations died mid-sentence. Tools were lowered. Sailors straightened up instinctively, sensing a shift they couldn't quite name yet. A heavy silence spread across the PU, tightening the air like a drum. Then the Admiral emerged. He didn't look at the recruits. Not once. Not even for a second. His eyes locked only on the old man in cuffs, and in that stare was something electrifying. Recognition, disbelief, and a wave of emotion strong enough to make even the bystanders swallow hard. He walked straight toward him, brushing past the trainees as if they weren't even there. Without asking permission, without hesitation, he reached out, unlatched the cuffs himself, and let them fall into his own hand. The metal clattered against the deck with a sharp clang that echoed all the way down the dock. Then the Admiral stepped back, heels clicking together, and delivered a full, rigid salute. His hand trembled, just slightly, but enough for everyone to see it. No one on that dock had ever seen an Admiral salute first. "Recruits," he said, loud enough for his voice to carry across the gathered crowd. "You detained one of the very men who built the foundation you stand on." The trainees stiffened, color draining from their faces. "This man," the Admiral continued, gesturing to him with the respect reserved for legends, ran missions before the term SEAL even existed. UDT operations so deep in the jungle, no maps have ever acknowledged them. Rescue missions where he pulled men out of impossible situations. Men who lived because he refused to leave them for dead. That tattoo on his arm isn't decoration. It's the mark of teammates who never made it home. Sailors stared, some whispering as realization rippled through them. A living relic. A ghost out of Navy lore. Someone they'd heard of only in stories told in low voices after midnight watch. The recruits looked like they wanted to sink straight through the PO and into the ocean. Their pride evaporated, replaced by a raw, stinging shame that tightened their chests and burned behind their eyes. They had treated a legend like a trespasser. They had cuffed a man whose entire life had been spent earning the very uniform they were still struggling to deserve. The old man didn't say a word. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He didn't scold. He simply stood there, quiet and steady, the weight of years in his shoulders and the quiet authority of someone who had seen things no one else ever would. And somehow, his silence made everything hit even harder. The Admiral let the silence settle until every recruit felt the weight of it pressing down on their shoulders. When he finally spoke, his voice was controlled, but there was steel under every word. "You learned tactics," he said, looking each of them in the eye, "but not judgment. And judgment is what keeps men alive. Judgment is what turns recruits into operators." None of them moved. Their backs were rigid, their faces tight, the sting of humiliation still fresh. They'd trained for physical intensity, for pressure, for fear. But nothing had prepared them for this, for being corrected in front of the entire dock, and by a man they had no right to lay hands on in the first place. The old man stepped closer, not commanding, not intimidating, just present. He placed a light hand on the arm of the lead recruit. The kid flinched, expecting anger. Instead, the old man's voice was quiet, almost kind. "Respect isn't rank," he said. "Respect is vision. See who's in front of you before you decide who they are." The recruit swallowed hard, nodding, eyes fixed on the ground. And the transformation didn't end on the dock. Word spread through the base like wildfire, and by the end of the week, a new mandatory training module was announced. A program built around humility, de-escalation, and the forgotten stories of living veterans who shaped the modern force. They named it the Hartman Protocol, honoring the lesson everyone had witnessed, a reminder carved into the Navy's culture that strength means nothing without wisdom. A few weeks later, the atmosphere couldn't have been more different. No docks, no shouting, no tension thick enough to taste. Just the warm, dusty glow of a VFW hall, the kind filled with old photographs, heavier memories, and the low rumble of stories being passed from one generation to the next. The recruits, dressed in plain clothes, shoulders no longer puffed up with false confidence, sat quietly among the veterans. They didn't talk unless invited. They didn't interrupt. They just listened, absorbing every lesson wrapped in laughter, loss, and legacy. The lead recruit glanced across the room and saw him, Daniel Hartman, laughing with a group of men who clearly knew every chapter of his hidden history. For a moment, Hartman lifted his gaze, meeting the recruit's eyes. No resentment, no judgment, just a small, knowing nod. A gesture that carried more forgiveness and respect than any speech ever could. And in that quiet exchange, the transformation felt complete. Because heroes don't always come wrapped in medals or marching in formation. Sometimes they walk among us unnoticed, carrying stories with the power to humble even the strongest. If this story moved you, show your support, like, share, and drop a comment honoring the veterans in your life. Let their legacy live on through us.